looking pretty good. %78 voted, 80% voted. Keep it going. This is fun. This is better than trying to catch Pokemons. And we're about there. So thank you for participating. The correct answer is 55%. So give yourself a pat on the back if you were choosing the 55%. So when we look at the study, this was, and I have to make a clarification here, that as we look at the background of this research that we did, we know over the past 30 years that the pelvic floor has been shown to be an active player in producing intra-abdominal pressure. And we've seen that back as far as Dr. Punjabi's work, looking at stability. Paul Hodges definitely has added to that library of research. And as a result, we as physical therapists, Pilates teachers, and other restorative movement practitioners have incorporated these active pelvic floor lifting activities to try to increase intra-abdominal pressure, just like we do with the abdominal hollowing or trying to contract the transverse abdominis. And so with this all being sort of the hype, we had a lot of people trying to teach, and we see lots of courses about pelvic floor. We really wanted to understand this a little bit better. And so what we did is in the very first study, we now have over 250 Pilates teachers that we have data on. But I'm going to present to you the first study now where we had 79 persons, and then the third study where we had 45 subjects. And this first study, we had 79 experienced Pilates teachers. So these were people that typically had over 5 years as a Pilates teacher from all different schools, all different ages. And we basically had a standard protocol to look and observe with an ultrasound to see if they were able to lift their pelvic floor when they thought they were lifting their pelvic floor. And that's really the question. And all we're really measuring here is your proprioception correct? So if I tell everybody in the audience right now, lift up your left hand, and all of you lifted your left hand up in the air, that would be accurate proprioception. But if I said lift up your left hand, and 45% of you put your left hand down, that would be similar to what we're seeing in the pelvic floor activity. Now, this does not mean that there is necessarily a problem associated with it. It just means that we're finding that 45 to 50% of Pilates teachers who think they're lifting up their pelvic floor are actually pushing it down. So we divided them into 3 categories. The first category was women who successfully lifted their pelvic floor when they thought they were lifting their pelvic floor. So that's group A, and we called that the true group. And then we had the second group, group B, was the pelvic floor descended when the subject thought that they were lifting their pelvic floor, and we called that false. And the third group was inactive, which was when they did the self-cueing, there was actually no activities. We didn't see any lifting or pushing down. So let's take a look and see what this looks like. I hope you all can see the ultrasound images on the screen. And if we look here on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see where my arrow is. That should be what I'm referring to as left. You'll see the dome, and the darkness above that dome is the bladder. So what the dome represents is the pelvic floor, and then the space down below would be either the thighs or the pelvis itself, the pelvic bone, and the pelvic floor in the middle. So here you see the pelvic floor in its resting position, actually pretty high. And then on the next one, the contraction, we see that it lifts up. So if I drew a straight line across, you would see that it's probably about almost a centimeter higher than the resting position. So this would be a positive or a true pelvic floor lift. And the next one we're going to look at was actually the opposite. So here we have a resting position, and we draw that line across, and we see that the pelvic floor is actually lower. And I'll come back to this one a little bit later because we do see an elevation as if the muscle's contracting, but the abdominal pressure pushing down has pushed the viscera down, 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 and that's why we're seeing the pelvic floor dropping down. So the question here might be, are they actually contracting their pelvic floor, but the intra-abdominal pressure is so high that it actually pushes it down relative to the resting position. And we can take a look at the next one here as well. And this one's a little more clear, a nice full bladder. And we can see the line that I drew and show the difference. And this would be a clear example of not using the pelvic floor. And when they thought they were lifting, they probably were just increasing intra-abdominal pressure and pushing the pelvic floor down. Here's another example of that. Here's resting position. If I drew a line straight across, you would see that the height here is about almost a centimeter. Again, pushing it down. The pelvic floor thickness in this image is about the same as the pelvic floor thickness here, which would tell me they probably are not activating muscles like the pubococcygeus in this position. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I have some help monitoring it to make sure that we won't have a problem. All right. All right, just making sure we're good here. All right, let's take a look at another one. And here's an example again that by measure this would be a false because the height of the pelvic floor on the after is lower. But we do see the dome of the pelvic floor coming up. So that was similar to the first one, where again, I think that they are actually getting a pelvic floor contraction, but they're using so much intra-abdominal pressure that they're actually pushing the pelvic floor down. All right. And then the last one I have here, another example of same height of the pelvic floor and relaxing, but when we look across, when they thought they were contracting the pelvic floor, we see a decrease or a drop in the pelvic floor. All right, so the outcome results of this are as follows. Group A, we had 35 of those 79 that actually lifted their pelvic floor up when they thought they were lifting the pelvic floor up. We had Group B, the false group, where 36 were actually pushing the pelvic floor down when they thought they were pulling the pelvic floor up. And as I mentioned, there were some who looked like they were actually contracting the pelvic floor, but the intra-abdominal pressure was too great and was actually pushing the pelvic floor down relative to the resting position. And we had 4 that were inactive. There did not seem to be a difference in whether they were postpartum, if they had had vaginal delivery or C-section, their weight, their age, the years teaching, and even the school that they taught at. So this was a very interesting thing, that 45 to 50% failure to lift the pelvic floor accurately with self-cueing was so prevalent. Like, how is it that we as Pilates teachers and physical therapists were so unaware of what was actually going on in the pelvic floor? So that led us to other questions and other thoughts. And the purpose of this pilot study was just to see if we were using volitional contraction for muscles, if that actually got in the way of what we were teaching them to do, or if it was facilitating the increase in intra-abdominal pressure. And so I'd like to stop here for a second and open the floor up for some questions you might have before we move on to the study. And that is my question to you is, do we need to do volitional contraction of the pelvic floor to teach core stability and increase intra-abdominal pressure versus something spontaneous that we would experience while we're teaching a Pilates class, for example? Anybody have any questions? Now I'm seeing some questions. Good. Barely. How can I make that bigger? I see some questions coming in, and I'm going to open this up here. Give me 1 second. That's what should we do in that little tiny box.